There was a howl and a hooting sound up in the bushes. Up in the bushes. Bruno charged down the small side of the mountain's hill and started attacking the tribesmen. Bruno was throwing them here and there. "Bruno!" Newton's crew shouted. Bruno turned and got a 1-2 punch across the face by Newton that sent Bruno howling with a cross-eyed look on his face to the ground. When Bruno got up, Newton gave Bruno a 1-2 punch in the stomach and another 1-2 across the face. Bruno stopped attacking and just stood there looking stupid with his eyes shut and his mouth open in a distorted animal way like. Newton ticked the swinging Bruno with his finger, causing Bruno to come crashing down on his back, unconscious. "Thanks for stopping this thing," the chief said. "You're welcome. This is my pet Bruno, who I keep in a padded cell." Suddenly Bruno opened his eyes and ran toward the glowing cloud, thinking it was a transporter beam. "No, Bruno!" Newton shouted, but it was too late. Bruno jumped into the cloud and stood there looking stupid as he grew into an 18-foot tall giant. Bruno ran out of the cloud angrily and started throwing big boulders at it because he didn't beam back up to the ship. Newton flew off the ground and struck Bruno in the side with his head, knocking Bruno down. Bruno picked up a huge boulder to heave at Newton, but Newton pushed out Bruno's legs, and Bruno went crashing down again. Newton jumped on Bruno's chest and kicked Bruno in the jaw, knocking Bruno out. Then Newton used all of his artificial strength and lifted the 3-ton Bruno over his head, putting everybody who was watching the fight in wonder of Newton's powers. Newton threw Bruno 40 feet up the hill. Everybody cheered Newton when Bruno fell in the creek, but the cheering quit when Bruno tumbled down into the glowing cloud and grew 3 times even larger. Bruno howled and opened his eyes, looking dumb. Bruno stood up and was 54 feet tall. Everybody began to run down the hill with terror. Newton had to think fast, so he shot up into the sky and began circling Bruno's head. Newton began ramming into Bruno's head, knocking Bruno down around the creek and away from the cloud. Bruno started pulling up trees and big boulders to throw at Newton. Newton dodged every one of them and finally rammed Bruno in the side of the head. Bruno gave out a yell, crossed his eyes, and began to sway back and forth unconsciously. Newton wanted to show off his wonderful flying capability, so he flew down out of the sky and hit Bruno's gigantic head. Bruno crashed down on his back, shaking the ground, and tumbled right into the cloud again. "Oh no!" Newton shouted with despair as he landed on a tree branch. Bruno suddenly began to grow again. Bruno woke up again and stood up 162 feet tall. Bruno opened his crossed eyes and was terrified to see the ground weighed down by his feet. Bruno slipped in the mud of the stream and fell into the cloud again. Bruno began to grow again. Bruno stretched away the creek. He was now 486 feet tall. The creek he was in was pushed back into a now growing pond. "I give up," Newton said, flying off into the sky, but changed his mind when Bruno got up off the ground, pulled up a big, tall tree, and started toward his crew and the tribe. Newton flew down out of the sky and hit Bruno in the side of the head, then did it 5 more times, with Bruno swinging the tree here and there, trying to knock Newton out of the sky. Bruno's face was starting to get all black and blue from the rams of Newton's dive-bombing fists. Bruno was struck again and again. Newton's crew watched Newton and Bruno with the tribe. It looked like a fat man being stung in the face by a bee, and Newton was the bee in this case. Bruno's face was getting puffy, and Bruno was staggering around on the mountains, getting hit again and again. Suddenly, Bruno shielded his face from Newton and accidentally bashed Newton with the thick part of the tree. Newton fluttered around Bruno's head in a daze. "Get away, Newton!" his crew shouted frighteningly. Bruno watched Newton flutter around him, then bashed the tree on the dazed Newton again, knocking Newton out of the sky. Newton struck the ground with a big crash and tumbled down into the stream. Newton got up dazed, and Bruno swung the tree down and bashed it over Newton's head, pushing Newton's waist deep into the mud. Bruno swung again, and the only thing showing out of the muddy stream was Newton's head. Then the last swing from Bruno completely pushed Newton's head under the muddy stream bottom. Bruno whacked at the ground a few times to make sure the pesky bee wouldn't spring up. And after that, Bruno began walking up the hill. Bruno suddenly stepped on the cloud again and grew a monstrous 1,458 feet tall, actually larger than Thunderbolt, the giant robot. Bruno beat his chest like a gorilla and jumped up and down, shaking the entire island like a big earthquake. The volcano of the island began to blow its top, and an earthquake started up. The smoke, the volcano darkened the smoke, the volcano darkened the sky. Newton's crew and the chief's tribe ran to where Newton went under. The stream split apart by an earthquake crack, and Newton staggered up out of it with water pouring all over him. An hour later, when Newton healed, he said to the chief, "Do you have anything I can shrink Bruno with while my crew and your tribe escape the island on their boats?" The chief gave Newton 5 red mushroom puffballs that would shrink Bruno back to normal. A few minutes later, the island had sunk 5 feet more, and a big, long line of boats were beginning to escape the island with Newton's crew. Bruno stepped over the mountains and howled, unaware that Newton was flying around him like a gnat. Bruno grabbed onto the top of the volcano and pulled out a huge boulder and chucked it at the boats, destroying 5 of them, including the chief's. Newton had to think fast. Bruno was pushing the island under from his incredible size. Bruno walked onto the beach and began sinking the boats with a bunch of rocks. When Bruno picked up a giant beach rock that was as big as a hill to throw at the boats, Newton threw a shrink bulb at Bruno's face. When the bulb exploded on Bruno's nose, Bruno shrank. Now the rock that Bruno had over his head was twice as big as he. Bruno threw it at the boats and destroyed some more. Newton dropped another bulb on Bruno as Bruno threw 3 more rocks. Bruno shrank again. Now Bruno was 162 feet tall. Bruno threw 5 more rocks at the boats. There were only 2 boats left, and 12 people left counting Newton's crew. Newton dropped another bulb on Bruno. Now Bruno stood 54 feet tall. Bruno ran out into the sea and picked up a boat, then ran back onto the shore. Newton threw another bulb at Bruno. Bruno was now only 18 feet tall. Bruno grabbed a cute brown native girl and started up the island's mountains. All of a sudden, a tremendous earthquake started, and the whole island began to crack up. The sea poured in over the beach and drowned the natives. The seawater washed away the trees and soil and crept up the side of the island. And while the island sank, Newton flew over to the remaining boat that had his crew and started calling Sonia to beam them up. And while this was going on, Bruno was climbing up the side of the tallest and nearest mountain on the island. Bruno saw the sea coming up the side of the mountain and started throwing rocks at it, howling and hooting as the girl screamed. Bruno climbed up higher on the side of the mountain's cliff and threw more rocks at the approaching sea. Bruno punched at it when it reached his feet, then climbed on. A few seconds later, and the mountains Bruno was climbing on was the only thing left on the island. Bruno punched at the water again as it touched his feet, then climbed on. Newton had Sonia beam up his crew and 6 of the surviving natives, then began rowing the boat to the small sinking island. Newton could see Bruno in the dark steam of the volcano that was underwater from the sinking island now. Bruno was almost on top of the sinking island. Bruno threw some more rocks at the enraged approaching sea, then climbed up on top of the sinking mound with the girl raised up over his head in one hand. Bruno kicked at the water angrily and frightenedly, thinking it was a living thing. All of a sudden another quake occurred that split the mountain Bruno was standing on in 2. Bruno's foot fell into the crack, and the crack sealed up on his foot. Bruno howled and hooted as the water came up over the side of the island that was now underwater. Bruno looked like a big ogre thrashing about in the sea. Newton was now 20 feet from Bruno with the bulb in his hand. Bruno had the girl raised over his head, and the water was up to his neck. A few seconds passed, and only Bruno's arm was sticking out of the water with the girl in his big hand. Newton rowed the boat up to the big hand the girl was in, and Bruno's hand put her down in the boat and quit struggling. Then the entire hand was gone, only the water remained. Newton held the bulb in his hands and dove down into the water. Suddenly the water turned red and glowed a little, then faded out to its dark gray. The water was almost calm in the dark, sun-setting sky. All of a sudden, Newton swam to the surface with Bruno, who was back to normal size, and put the unconscious Bruno in the boat. After that, Newton climbed in the boat and called Mutania on his communicator, saying, "Okay, Sonia, beam up 3." And Newton, Bruno, and the native girl were beamed back aboard Mutania. Newton had a new crew of 7, and Bruno was back to normal in his cell. After that, Mutania left the planet. This next story I'm about to read is called The Ape Planet Lives. Newton, we are in the west side of the galaxy, the second solar system away from the Earth's, Sonia exclaimed at her control stations, which were the sensors. Good, I want to orbit around the planet I destroyed into oblivion 2 decades ago. You mean, Shirley said excitedly, yes, the ape planet. It should be in a gaseous debris from what we fired at them, Newton said, sitting down in his throne. But, as I remember, a rumor was going around that the ape planet was built back up again by the bee people, and now they're just as advanced as always. An hour later, Mutania was getting in view of the ape planet. Newton, I'm picking up a planet on my sensors. It seems to be the ape planet, Sonia said with great surprise. What? Focus on the sensors. And it can't be, Newton ordered, and sure enough, it was the ape planet. The big Earth-like planet slowly rotated in the viewing screen as Mutania began to orbit it. Newton got out of his throne and said to his crew, I'm going to beam down into the capital of the ape planet. I will return in 5 hours. After saying that, Newton walked down to the hall of the transporter room with Sonia. Newton stepped up onto the transporter plate, and Sonia beamed him down, wanting to beam down too on her home planet. Newton materialized down into the street of the capital city of the ape planet. Gorillas and orangutans walked through the street looking at the mutant Newton, thinking he was just another everyday, dumb, ugly human. Newton walked through the streets. The buildings were in the shapes of giant Greek pillared buildings. The apes didn't know that Newton was once their evil arm and legless mutant that once conquered and enslaved their planet almost 30 years ago. Newton walked up to the steps of the huge museum building of ape history. Newton saw big statues of great ape soldiers posing in battle scenes. Then Newton actually saw a statue of himself getting in a battle with the king of the planet, named Henry the Ape. The statue was black in color and stood 20 feet in height on the platform. It showed the gorilla king, Henry, with its arms wrapped around an arm and legless mutant that had swords stuck in its back with a knife in its neck. Newton walked up to the stand and read a slate that told about Newton and King Henry the Ape. It went like this. 28 years ago, our planet was attacked by a sinister mutant from hell called Newton. Not only did it attack our planet once, but it attacked it 4 times. We apes fought the mutant in our fields, in our yards, in our homes, but it still attacked. Our planet went human from the past until one day our brave King Henry battled with the demon and died in bravery from fire. Somewhere King Henry lives to battle the evil forces of the galaxy, in the hearts of apes. The end. After that, Newton walked into another room and saw a statue of apes dressed in combat uniforms pushing up a flag against the mutant Newton, who was shown with a sword stuck in his chest. The statue was called the Dragon Mutant Newton. Newton saw 2 more statues of him getting killed by the apes. Newton saw some paintings of him fighting with King Henry on a mountain. And after seeing all the surprising portraits and statues, Newton saw the last painting of him on top of a building getting machine-gunned by old, ancient biplanes like King Kong. Those apes have a sense of humor, Newton said to himself as he walked down the steps and into the street. Newton walked down an amusement street and saw another statue of him getting his head pulled off by King Henry. Then Newton's attention was broken when a big jet carrying apes flew over the city in the afternoon sky. When it started getting dark, Newton beamed back aboard Mutania and told his crew about what he had seen down on the ape planet. "Can we beam down now?" Sonia asked excitedly. "You bet. Abacaba, you can beam down tomorrow." After Newton said that, he walked with his crew down to the transporter room. He beamed Sonia and Shirley down first. Then the 7 crew members who survived the sinking island on a planet. Then Obakuba beamed Newton down. When Newton beamed down with his crew, they were surrounded by guerrilla soldiers. "You're under arrest, Newton," a big gorilla said, dressed in armor and wearing an army helmet. "What for?" Newton asked. The 10 guerrillas aimed their machine guns at Newton and said, "For making our planet go sapien." The guerrilla soldiers began marching Newton and his crew up to the kingdom of the king who ruled the ape planet. They put Newton's crew in the dungeons of the castle and took Newton up to the king. They kicked out Newton's feet, making Newton bow at the king, who was smoking a cigar and looking at the rain that was pouring outside the window. The king turned around and faced Newton, saying, "You are the horrible Newton who attacked and destroyed this planet to Kingdom Kong." "Yes, how did you know I was going to beam down on your planet?" "We saw your ship orbit on our sensors, so when we located your transporter setting, we could catch you red-handed when you beamed down." "Are you going to let me and my crew go free?" "No, we have been waiting for a long time for you to return, and you're not going to escape until we get our revenge on you for the crimes you have done, like attacking our planet 4 times, then killing my father, Henry the Ape, and enslaving the apes and monkeys to rebuild that castle out in the sea that sunk." Newton broke in, saying, "I guess I made your planet go ape." "For that you shall die today in the arena," the king shouted. "Or my name isn't King Henry Jr. the Second." King Henry Jr. shot Newton with a phaser on stun. Newton just stood there looking puzzled, then realized that it was supposed to hurt him, so he fell to the floor and acted like it hurt him. King Henry Jr. fired again at Newton and Newton acted unconscious. Take the scum of a beast to the torture chamber," King Henry said, clapping his hands. And the next Newton was that he was being strapped down in a stretcher bed. Newton's crew was behind bars looking at Newton. They chained his feet and wrists. King Henry walked down the steps and into the chamber, saying, "Newton, do you have any last words before we stretch you into a handsome 12 feet? "Yes. What are you going to do to my crew?" "I'm having them killed in the guerrilla arena, where they fight with my soldiers. I'm already done with 2 of them. Sonia and Shirley will be the last, since they're apes," Henry said a little excitedly. "Newton, don't let the big apes do this to us," Newton's crew begged. Newton said to Saltime, "Are they going to make a big statue of me on a stretcher with a big monkey pulling me into?" "Silence!" Henry shouted angrily. Then said, "Begin!" 2 gorillas on each limb of Newton began slowly turning the gears to pull Newton in 2. And while they were, 2 gorillas took out another 2 of Newton's crew and took them to the arena where 2 big gorillas stood with brass knuckles. Chimpanzees, orangutans, and other primitive primates watched in the grandstands. And back in the chamber, Newton was up off the stretcher from the pulling. "Increase the turning," the king ordered. Newton shouted, "You must be a monkey, uncle. You must be a monkey's uncle." Then, when Newton was just about to snap in 2, he pulled with all his artificial strength. That was all the way to their potential power, and snapped the chains around his ankles right off. Newton stood up angrily, but the apes pulled the chains they had. But the apes pulled the chains that had Newton's arms, and Newton was pulled down on the turning gear to the rack. The guerrillas began firing their machine guns at Newton's back, but Newton had his supernaturally strong mutant muscles flexed, and the bullets bounced off of him and killed 5 of the gorillas. Fire at his artificial arms and legs. They're the things that will damage him. But right as the king shouted that, Newton snapped the chains, did a backward flip, and kicked one of the guerrilla soldiers through the bars of the cell. Newton quickly flew over to the cell that imprisoned his crew and tore the door off, then tossed it at two of the remaining guerrillas. King Henry Jr. was the only one left. Newton looked at him angrily and said, "I'm going to make you go ape, or human, as you apes call it." Newton wasn't going to hurt Henry, but Henry didn't